first night and you work from 7 p. to 4 a.
To when?
It's 4 a. And then you work the second night, 7 to 4. And then the third night, you work from 3 p. to 12 midnight. The fourth day, you work from 1 p. to 10 p. The fifth day, you work from 8 a. to 3 p.
How'd you keep track of
Oh, my
And
gosh.
the
I knew it.
last day, you work from 6 a. to 3 p.
I knew it, I
You
had it memorized.
backed up all the way through the week. And then when you got off at 3 p. on your last day, you didn't go back to work until 7 when you went back to work, so you got 2.5 days. But
Wow.
I did that for years and years.
What was, why did they do it that way?
So you overlapped, there wasn't people coming and going at the same time all the time, because everybody
Well-
was, that schedule started on different days for different people.
Hello?
And they were worried.
Here's your-
We were
Get your-
worried about
Get your
you.
paper.
Get your paper, get your paper.
We were worried about you.
Worried not, I need it.
And you thought you weren't
I'm
coming.
glad
Oh, my goodness.
Well,
You didn't know I
she
got the
wasn't-
kid.
Wasn't here before us.
Yeah, that's.
Does that mean she's not real late?
Oh, my goodness, I only have 3 minutes.
We got 4 minutes and
Oh, my, I can't trust these watches anymore.
Karen,
I'm gonna say you're gonna have.
You got
some-
chicken at Walmart that one time for us, right?
Yeah.
You know what, I went and asked I asked the guy for fried chicken, he said, I'm sorry, we don't have fried chicken.
The one right here on Cypress Gardens, the newer one down there?
Yeah.
The closest to 27?
I know I've seen chicken in
Well,
here.
ever since I went, you know, they gave up.
She brought it out.
They said, we're done with this.
It's all your fault.
I know. I ran them out of chicken business.
Oh, I know what he said. I said I wanted fried chicken, he said, we don't fry anything. That's what he said.
Oh, my goodness.
And so at what point did you say, you
Well-
lying?
sack of you know what.
Oh, forget it, I didn't want chicken anyway.
Sometimes you just crave a little fried chicken. I guess.
I do.
Yeah, we don't fry them.
So we have to buy anything if I want something fried. Well, should I feel intimidated the way this thing is?
Have you got your mic on?
Yes, it is.
Oh.
Yes, you over here.
They're live, by the way.
I'll spread it around.
You
We
get
are live, okay.
Pardon?
Get
You know, as I'm walking out the door, the delivery UPS guy comes up, you know. So I'm wrapped on the living room floor.
So he had it.
He had it.
I gotta give you more instructions now.
All right.
Don't leave until I do.
I won't even open it till I listen to you first.
What are you
What
instructing?
did you get? I'm dying.
I got it. You know, when I left the
Oh, yeah.
dinner, I
Yeah,
got
yeah.
that flat, and I realized the last 2 cars I bought had no spare tire.
Yeah.
So I ordered a donut tire.
Oh,
Yeah,
so you'll have one.
so I'll have a, so that will mean I'll get no more
Blood
flats.
rinse, the whole thing.
You
Didn't
mean-
have any of
No,
that.
the car you
I
bought
didn't
didn't
have a
even,
jack, nothing.
no jack, no donut, no
It's,
nothing?
it's when you don't have jack.
I like that,
Oh, shoot.
I like that.
But it's supposed to be all-inclusive, whatever came.
She got a can of air.
Yeah, all they give you is one of those, here's a can, it'll fix everything, you know.
I love it,
Oh, my
I
God.
love it. Oh, well.
And she told Don about it, and he said, I wonder if she, but later he's at home, he said, I wonder if she has a jab. Did she think she'd say anything about a jab? So he called her and said, do you have a jab?
She didn't know.
Oh.
She went out and looked.
Yeah, the hold down,
nothing.
because those, you need a hold down thing. You
Yeah.
put it through a spindle wire, a hold down.
Yeah.
So it doesn't bounce around.
None of that.
Love
What
Ranch, of
what's
course.
your car?
No, that
Well,
was-
this
none of
one's a
that was there.
Volkswagen, but the one before that was a Hyundai, and that had no cockpit tire either. It's not just one
Wow.
maker, I guess. You got it. Next car I'm asking, will you have a tire in there?
looked at the back end of mine, and there's a tire.
Yeah.
Did, do we still have a Bible study on Mondays? Is Fabio still doing that?
Yes.
He's still
Yes, he
doing
is.
it, it's
'Cause
really,
It's
I
not been
enjoy.
on the announcements, has it?
What is he
It
doing
was in-
now?
it was in
He's doing
this week.
On
Catholicism.
the
Was it-
announcements?
Oh,
that's-
God.
oh, I don't know about that. I don't, I can't read them, so I don't know.
I would have loved to,
Well, he's still doing it.
I know, but I like to get in on it.
We just, oh yeah, I always wondered why so much emphasis on Mary, things like this.
Yeah.
Is Fabio's, yeah, is it on
They pray to
Well,
Mary,
Carol
and she can
goes to
forgive
it.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, she's supposed to
I know.
intercede for
I
you.
haven't read that on the announcements.
Well, it's pretty,
It's not on the
Well, the priest
announcements.
came too, yeah. But
It's not on the announcements that go on the
I know.
screen.
Should it be?
I would think so.
Well,
But sometimes I don't read those, so.
Hey, that's not right. All the work he puts into that, you don't even bother reading it?
Sometimes I get distracted.
Thank you.
I get.
Well, once you get a kudo.
I get distracted.
well, I can't read the words, even up there on the mantra that's over there by the computer, I can't read that one either.
we're up and running?
Yep.
Okay,
This is all being recorded?
I guess so.
Oh, no.
Oh, well. Well, before we get going this week, well, this is actually part of getting going. If you have a difficult time going on in your life, is there a particular scripture passage or a particular song that you read or sing to yourself that help get you through it? And what is it?
Actually, what people call the old hymns or traditional hymns, the hymns, some of the praise songs,
Some of the praise songs? Okay,
usually the hymns.
the hymns? Anyone in particular?
Well, my favorite is In the Garden, there's some people
Ah,
that like
yes,
that.
yes.
I can imagine myself in a garden,
Mhm.
with Jesus walking with me, peaceful, birds singing, you know, that kind of thing.
Yep, yep. You got one?
I don't have one in particular right now that I'm thinking of. We're in the car, we always have, it, especially now, we have the.
Bill Gaithers and Lightning.
Yeah.
Yeah, we run that all the time in the car. Yeah.
I believe it is 2 Corinthians 13 or 14, I don't remember the exact one. And it says, "My grace is sufficient for you.
I knew that was-
Power is made perfect in weakness. When I am weak, you are strong."
When I am weak and you are strong. And I'll tell you, for the first 2 months this year, I really used that one. Because weakness was right where I was at, that's for certain. Whoa, let there be
I
light.
see you online.
Let there be
I've got
light.
to turn it up.
Okay, that's good, thank you. Well, that being the case, and our numbers are low, why don't we just go right to the video? Can you do that for us?
Now that he's got the lights all up.
Yeah,
turn them
now
all
they
down.
can.
This past session we were together, we started reviewing the potential of a big fish swallowing a small prophet. And we reviewed all sorts of information on large aquatic creatures and good information in particular that we had gathered from the 18th and 19th century whaling industry. We determined that it is possible that a large sperm whale might have been wandering around the Mediterranean at the appropriate moment for the great almighty creator of the universe to signal him, kind of like a border collie or an Australian sheepdog, and say, "Hey, you, over there, go get my prophet, swallow him down, not too far, and please regurgitate him where I need him to be." We had noticed in the midst of this study that although this is possible for a sperm whale to actually swallow a human being whole, and it is possible for a sperm whale to regurgitate said human whole, it would take at least a little bit of a miracle for that regurgitation to have happened in such a fashion that our prophet actually would have survived the process. But of course, in both our session and in our discussion following, we remembered that, oh yeah, that would be exactly the point. So in this theme, in this chapter, our literary theme is the theme to appoint. And we have assumed that God had appointed our prophet to go and bring the good news of who Yahweh is and that repentance is possible to the Ninevites. We had recognized through our past studies that the Ninevites are folks that we might not necessarily want to be friends with. They are tough, they are brutal, and they have a reputation for the cruelty of a military machine emerging from the Assyrian Empire that would reduce anyone to a quivering mass of fear. And yet, this is God's call to Jonah. We saw that Jonah heard this call and ran the other way. Specifically, he ran twice as far west as he was called to go east. And yet our God has brought him back by his appointing of that whale to spit him out on the dry ground, which is exactly where he needed to start in the first place. So as we move into the rest of chapter 2, we're still dealing with that literary theme of to appoint. God appointed the prophet and he failed. He appointed the large aquatic mammal and he did not fail. So let's see what else our God is going to appoint to move this story forward. So to appoint, chapter 2, let's take a look at the very first passage of the chapter. And it reads, "So Yahweh appointed a great fish." Remember that our narrator is not necessarily a marine biologist. And by the way, for all you real marine biologists who are watching this tape, I know I'm only close in dealing with your discipline, but I'm hoping I'm close enough. So, Yahweh appointed a great fish, a dag gadol, to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was in the inward parts of that fish for 3 days and 3 nights. And one of our theories here is perhaps the inward parts he was in was the first stomach of the sperm whale, where the food is warmed and the seawater is squeezed out, and perhaps, miraculously, he could have survived in that space. Then Jonah prayed to his God from inside the fish. Now, I want to reiterate to you folks that whereas we have been trained to think that the whale at this point in time is yet another aspect of Jonah's very terrible day, and that this whale is kind of our antagonist, and oh my gosh, what a horrible thing to happen, in reality, our prophet has been out floating in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. Our prophet, who is a Hebrew, who probably only barely knows how to dog paddle, he is absolutely hopeless in his current situation until God appoints this great fish to come and rescue him. Now again, in both popular teaching and in the commentaries, folks look at this as though the whale is bad news. But as we take a look at chapter 2, we're going to find out that this whale is good news. Not only is he the most unlikely lifeguard of all time, but he's good news, as is obvious by Jonah's prayer when he gets inside the whale. So obvious that we're going to have commentators out there that are going to say that Jonah's prayer must be some sort of later insertion into the text, because it is clearly a prayer of thanksgiving and clearly a prayer of deliverance. And what in the world is a guy who's sitting in the inward parts of a large aquatic mammal doing, celebrating the fact that he's in there? And the answer, of course, would be that Jonah is well aware he should be a dead man, and he's not a dead man. In other words, our prophet, our holy man, our trained theologian, who should have known better, who has intentionally and thoughtfully and with every ounce of his faith life rebelled against the will of his God, has actually been given a second chance. So let's take a look at this psalm itself. We're looking at Jonah's song of deliverance in the midst of the whale. It starts in verse 2 of chapter 2, and this is what our prophet cries out. I called out of my distress to Yahweh, and he answered me. Okay, when did he cry out in his distress? Probably when he was out floating in the middle of the ocean. Because out in the middle of the ocean, the whales are really big, the sharks are really big, and it's a long dog paddle home, especially if you don't happen to be good at dog paddling. So I called out of my distress to Yahweh, and he answered me from the belly of Sheol. And for those of you who don't know, Sheol is the word for hell or Hades. Now, the definition of hell in the Old Testament is different than the definition of hell in the New Testament. It's not necessarily a place of punishment. It's simply a place where the dead abide. But Jonah understands that he was sitting at the mouth, the entrance of Sheol. And as we talked about a few sessions ago, the ancients believed that the sea itself was the entrance into the underworld. So to be out floating in the middle of the Mediterranean, Jonah's pretty convinced that he is on his way to death, Hades, Sheol. Okay, from the belly of Sheol, I cried out for help, and you heard my voice. You cast me into the heart of the sea. Now, is that what happened in the story? Who hurled Jonah overboard? Oh, that would be the sailors, right? But we remember that those pagan sailors didn't want to throw him overboard. And the prophet wound up having to tell them, look, guys, if you don't throw me overboard, my God's going to get you. Because my God's angry at me. So throw me in. So Jonah is well aware. He's come full circle. He's recognized the sovereignty of God. You cast me into the heart of the seas. The current surrounded me. All of your breakers and waves passed over me. Water encompassed me to the point of death. So Jonah knows full well that he's on his way to his last ride. The primeval deep engulfed me. And that's an interesting phrase. It comes straight out of the creation narratives. The primeval deep is what God orders and organizes in order to create the world in which we live. It is the primeval deep that erupts at the flood under Noah, and it's the primeval deep that's about to swallow Jonah. The primeval deep engulfed me. Weeds were wrapped around my head. I'm going to say that was probably kelp. I descended to the root of the mountains, but you have brought up my life from the pit, O Yahweh, my God. So obviously Jonah is looking at this story as a story of good news. Obviously Jonah thinks that he has been delivered. Obviously Jonah, who had fled from his God and received the result that his God knew where he was and had every intention of going and finding him and bringing him back, has recognized that he has been delivered by this same God in the midst of the sea, and he has been delivered by the actual act of being swallowed by a whale. So again, as we have thought so often that this is bad news, guys, who did swallow Jonah is actually really good news, because otherwise our guy was going down. Now we're also going to assume that when Jonah got swallowed, he didn't actually have a pen and paper on him, just guessing, or a stylus and a cuneiform tablet, depending on his preferred writing style. So we're going to guess that he's not sitting in there like, you know, the tale of Pinocchio, actually writing stuff down with a little candle. Rather, more than likely, as Jonah cries out in the midst of this experience, what he is pulling up out of his soul is some verse, some song that he has memorized in his past life. Do you have any of those? Passages from the Bible or lines from a song that when you are completely and absolutely in crisis, just arise to the top and you find yourself repeating them over and over again? I have a passage like that comes out of a Rich Mullins song, and the line that comes out of the Rich Mullins song is, if I stand, let me stand on the promise that you will pull me through. And if I can't, let me fall on the grace that first brought me to you. That is a song that's found its way deep into my heart and deep into my mind, and I wind up singing it quietly in the back of my head on a regular basis. Or perhaps Psalm 62 for me. One thing God has spoken, two things I have heard, that power belongs to Yahweh, and that covenant faithfulness is yours, O Lord. Now we're going to guess that the same is true of Jonah, that he has memorized psalms and passages over the course of his life. And when we look at this prayer that he prays in chapter 2, and as you're working on in your study guides, we see that Jonah's psalm, or song of deliverance, sounds an awful lot like Psalm 18, which, more than likely, Jonah, as a holy man and an academic, has memorized somewhere along the way. Listen to Psalm 18. The cords of death encompassed me. What had Jonah sung? Water has encompassed me. Jonah said, to the point of death, the primeval deep engulfed me, and weeds were wrapped around my head. Psalm 18 says, and the torrents of ungodliness terrified me, and the cords of Sheol had wrapped themselves around me. Psalm 18, verse 6, in my distress, I called upon Yahweh and cried to my God for help. He heard my voice out of his temple, and my cry for help before him came into his ears. Now, I'm really interested in that part about he heard my voice from his temple. Because do you remember a few sessions ago when we talked about the fact that Jonah's ultimate ambition was to get away from the presence of Yahweh? And we all remembered, oh, you can't get away from the presence of Yahweh. We recognize that Yahweh is omnipresent. He's everywhere all the time. And of course, Jonah realized that. The guy has got all the training you could ever ask for. And yet, in his moment of crisis, he thought he could get away from God's presence. In other words, he was starting to think like a pagan. And we challenged each other to ask the question, what really rises to the surface when we're in crisis? And so as Jonah circles back on this very traumatic experience, he says, you know what? In my distress, I called out to the Lord. I cried to my God for help, and he heard my voice out of his temple. Well, part of the Old Covenant belief system is that the presence actually dwelt in the temple. So for Jonah to get away from the presence of the Almighty is for Jonah to get away from the temple. And so out in the middle of the Mediterranean, where he thought he could get away from his God, he is now giving thanks in bucket loads that you can't actually get away from the presence of Yahweh. And so floating around in the midst of the ocean, out of his temple, Yahweh heard my cry. And my cry came before his ears. He sent from on high, he took me and he drew me out of many waters. He delivered me from my strong enemy. Is this strong enemy the whale? I don't think so. Actually, again, I think that if we put that whale in a red bathing suit and had it run down the San Francisco beach line, we would be seeing for ourselves one of the greatest lifeguards of all time. And so God has appointed this whale. The whale has rescued the prophet. Our little guy is now on his way where he started, and Jonah's psalm of praise is spilling from his lips. The passage goes on. While I was fainting away, I remembered Yahweh, and my prayer came to you into your holy temple. Those who regard vain idols forsake their faithfulness, but I will sacrifice to you with the voice of thanksgiving. That's interesting too, because sacrifice was a very literal reality in Jonah's world, and yet he is sacrificing with a voice of thanksgiving. That which I have vowed, I will pray. Salvation is from Yahweh. As you look at those words, do you recognize them? This business about sacrifice and offering a vow? You might, because back in chapter 1, when the heathen, the pagan, the rough and tumble sailors, when they saw the sea calmed because the prophet was hurled into the sea, they did the same thing. They offered sacrifice to Yahweh and they made vows. What's the difference between these belief systems? The answer is that our missionary, our prophet, who is unwillingly answering his calling, and at this point I would still make the argument, does not get the point, has inspired in the sailors the same actions that Yahweh is requiring of him. This is all very interesting when you take those folks who don't know, those folks who aren't interested, those folks who would mock a believer, and you juxtapose them with the holy man, which I think is so much the thesis of this book. In fact, I don't think this book has much at all to do with Nineveh. I think this book has a great deal to do with what a seasoned believer is learning about the character of his God. And for those of you who are seasoned believers, I'm praying that by the time we're done, you are going to get the point. Okay, so we keep moving on. Then Yahweh spoke to the fish. I love that line. Yahweh spoke to the fish, and it vomited Jonah out onto dry land. Now, if you ever get to take Hebrew with me and read the creation narratives, you will notice that the distinction between the sea and the dry land in the creation narratives is the exact language that's being used in this passage. We've got the primordial deep, which is very, very dangerous, and we've got the Yabashah, the dry land. And Jonah is being rescued from the primeval deep and is being thrown out on the Yabashah, the dry land. And not only is being thrown out on the Yabashah, which is where humans are supposed to dwell in the first place, but he's being tossed out onto the very spot where Yahweh wanted him in the first place. In other words, what we've got here is the biggest redo that has ever happened. You know, you're out there watching your kids play dodgeball and something goes wrong, the ball winds up in a tree, somebody lost a point, and someone yells, "Do over! Do over!" And this is what I don't think Jonah is yelling, but Yahweh is offering him. All right, dude, do over. We're going to try this one again. And so Jonah, the great man of God, who has intentionally, willfully denied and defied the command of his God, is given a second chance. One of the questions we're going to be asking this book is, will this holy man, this trained and seasoned believer, do the same for the Ninevites? Will he offer them a second chance? Okay, so we need to turn the page into chapter 3 as we move forward with our study. And as we move into chapter 3, we're going to find that we have got another literary theme now. So chapter 1 was to hurl, tool. Chapter 2 was to appoint manah. And chapter 3 is kara, to announce or to speak, or even the concept of the word being offered. So Yahweh has given his prophet a second chance. This time the prophet obeys, and this time the prophet, according to verse 1, actually hears the word, kara, of Yahweh and moves into his calling. So the word of Yahweh came to Jonah a second time, go to Nineveh, the great city, and announce to it the message I give to you. So we've got the big do-over, and Jonah, who is now hopefully showered, I'm hoping by this point in time, changed his clothes maybe, washed his hair, is on his way to Nineveh. He's still got a big trip in front of him. It's a good 600 miles, but it's something you can do on camel as opposed to on trade ship. Now, I do not want you to think that at this point in time, Jonah has fully repented and he's completely convinced that it's time to passionately bring the gospel to the people he has hated up until this point. I don't think that's what's going on at all. I think that Jonah knows that it's way better to get on a camel and go to Nineveh than to get back in the Mediterranean Sea and have another whale come and get him. I think he's pretty convinced at this point in time that his God is perfectly capable of dragging him back from wherever he thinks he can escape to and bringing him to the point of his calling. This is one of those things that you just got to do. Kind of like walking into junior high for the first time. You just got to do it. There really are no options. And you just kind of clench your jaw and you do it. So this is where our prophet is. And as we move into chapter 3, we read, then the word of Yahweh came to Jonah a second time, go to Nineveh, the great city, and announce to it the message I give you. So Jonah still does not get the point, but he has been disciplined and he will obey. And so Jonah went to Nineveh, as Yahweh had said. Here's our theme again. And now Nineveh was a very great city. So it could have taken him weeks to get there, but our narrator is not interested in that point. We need to just get to Nineveh. Cut to the chase here. Hollywood's on board. Filming costs money. Okay, so Jonah went to Nineveh, as Yahweh said. Now Nineveh was a very great city. We've already reviewed that. A royal city, ancient in the Assyrian Empire. It will become the capital toward the end of Jonah's tenure. God-like is what the text itself says, and a visit required 3 days. Now, that passage about a visit required 3 days has actually stirred up all sorts of controversy. People have tried to argue that, oh, the city was so big it took 3 days to walk around it or to walk through it, and they've tried the circumference and the this and the that and the other, and we haven't had a lot of success. D.J. Wiseman actually made the suggestion years, decades ago at this point, that perhaps what's going on is a diplomatic visit. And for those of you who've done Epic of Eden, understanding the Old Testament, you know all about covenants and treaties. And for a diplomat to arrive, there was actually a pattern for the visit. The diplomat would arrive, they would be welcomed by the king, they would give a chance to settle into royal quarters and get cleaned up and fed. The second day they would do business, and the third day they would give them gifts, feed them again, and send them home. I actually think that's the best interpretation of these 3 days. The other possibility is that there's some sort of spelling error. And I don't want to panic anyone in the audience, but reality is we do have spelling errors in the biblical text periodically. And it could be that rather than saying 3 days, the text actually says 30 days. So instead of Shalosheth Yamim, that would be 3 days, we have Shaloshim Yamin, which would be 30 days. And the intent is that it took him 30 days to get to Nineveh, as opposed to the idea of 3 days visiting. Another option is that there's a parallel here that between the 3 days and nights that he spent in the whale, he's spending 3 days and nights in Nineveh. I don't have the answer to this. I don't think it changes the story, so we're just going to keep moving on here. So as our prophet Jonah begins to approach the city of Nineveh, he is approaching an enormous metropolis. What you're seeing on your screen right now is a basic footprint coming out of an archaeological drawing of the city of Nineveh itself. And you're seeing that the city is actually 750 hectares. Now, the word hectare is archaeology speak for 2.5 acres. So 750 hectares actually equals 1,850, give or take a few, acres. So this is a very big city. And to put it in perspective, Jonah is coming from a country where the capital city of Jerusalem is only 30 acres. So 30, 1,850. This is the biggest city our sweet backwoods holy man has ever seen. Now he's going to be entering the city, as you can see on the diagram, from the Mashti Gate, because that's the gate that faces to the west and the highway that he would have approached. There are actually 15 gates in the city. Again, it's enormous. And each of the gates is actually named for a deity. So from the very get-go, our rabbi with his little, curly sideburns and his kashrut type eating pattern and his holy clothes is walking to the gate of a city that's named for a foreign deity. And upon entering the city, according to the description that Halton offers in How Big Was Nineveh in BBR, upon entering the city, one would encounter wide streets, some with stone paving, gardens, parks, game parks, that means with wild animals in them, canals, palaces, temples, houses. This must have been a breathtaking experience, and the combination and grandeur of these features certainly distinguished Nineveh from almost every other ancient city. In fact, Leo Oppenheim, the great granddaddy of Assyriology, describes Nineveh as the second largest city in the world during its day. And here's Jonah from Gath Hefer. Remember, the tribe of Zebulun, who's walking into the city with a mass of humanity around him, and it's his calling to step onto a street corner, step onto an apple crate, and start preaching the gospel of Yahweh, his tribal deity, from way over there on the Fertile Crescent, from that little country of, is it Israel? Is that what you call yourselves? And are you one of those Hebrews? This is Jonah's calling. Here's an image actually of the Mashti Gate. You can see the modern highway in the foreground. This would have been the gate that he entered the city through. And of course, these are archaeological ruins at this point in time, and we can only conjecture the grandeur of the city in its youth and its birth. I want you to remember as Jonah walks through the gate of the city, who it is we're talking about. We're not just dealing with the fact that it's big and it's fancy and it's royal. We're not just dealing with the fact that Jonah is actually from a fairly obscure country and is overwhelmed with the size and the grandeur of his audience. We're dealing with Assyrians. We're dealing with the folks who created the concept of exile. We're dealing with an ancient empire that is known for its reputation of brutality and cruelty. This is the community that I have compared to the Borg, and we have compared to the ISIS of modern days. This is the people group that is the stuff of nightmares. And Jonah steps onto his apple crate and he starts preaching the gospel. So as we
Well, we got a problem here.
end this session, in the midst of chapter 3, my launch question to you is this. Have you ever been in a place where you really needed a do-over? Have you ever been in a place where you desperately needed a second chance? And my question to you is, did you get that second chance? Did you get it from your family? Did you get it from your church? Did you get it from your community? See you next session.
Just an aside, if you're not a Star Trek fan, you might not have understood what she meant by Borg. Borg was the all-consuming enemy in many of the Star Trek shows, and you didn't ever want to come up against them because they would convert you, and you didn't have a choice because they put a little gadget on your head. Maybe that's what happens, though, sometimes when we go into people that are different than us, and they try to convert us. They convert us with their societies rather than with their minds and their thoughts and our needs. Have you ever been a place where you need to have a redo? Can you want to share it?
I don't want to share, but I definitely have.
Needed a second chance. Yep. I know that coming out of my background in business and marrying into her family, I knew I had something wrong with me, but I didn't know what to do with it. I knew I needed a second chance. And while the family played a big part, what really changed me was this missionary from England and a pastor in a Methodist church. I wanted to be different. I didn't know how. Do you think that there just might be a lot of people that want to be different but don't know how? Deep down they want to be. They're not even at the point of admitting that they want to be. But there's this barrier here. We've got Jonah, trained man in God, priest, and he didn't really know much about the character of God when he came right down to it, because he was resisting the basis of his call. Or do I have that one all wet? What do you think?
Jonah being appointed a prophet, and she said he had all the training possible. So he had more understanding, I would think, than general people, I mean, most people. He certainly would understand that he couldn't get away from God, but he tried. But he didn't want to take this assignment, go this direction,
Yeah. Yeah.
but he had to anyway.
Have you ever felt like God wants you to do something, but you, I can't do that. That's not inside me. That's not who I am. And later on found out that maybe you could.
I guess I could say, I'm sorry, I'm interrupting there.
No, you're not. Go
Say
ahead.
something else. When I was in Lakeland for medical imaging, I stayed there with my daughter, and this other person, female, sitting there a couple chairs over, I saw her there, but I didn't speak to her. My daughter and I were talking, we were laughing at the TV and all this sort of thing, and finally this woman spoke up and said something to us. I said, oh, she wasn't friendly, she wants to talk. Some people don't like to be interrupted, or whatever, in their thought, whatever that is. We learned that was her birthday, 49th birthday, but she'd been in an accident in a car 2 years before, and the seatbelt really did some damage, and been through surgeries, been pain, still trying to figure things out. I mean, medically, people have been trying to figure things out for her. So she was hoping she'd have a good report that day from her imaging. And she did. They said, come back in 6 months. She's been gone 6 months ever since this accident. And as she left, we were chatting with her, and as she left, we said, good to see you, whatever, good to meet you, and stuff. I never did learn her name. I thought, oh my. Then I thought, well, if I had stepped away from me and let Jesus take over, I could have asked her some questions like, and I'm not afraid of asking this question, I could get either no response or just a bad no. Do you attend church? I don't think that was too bad after our little discussion. But I never asked the question. And then I would have expected that if she believed, that prayer might be a good thing to do. I never stepped away from being myself. Moses, I'm not the person. I don't talk to people. So I pushed myself away about that. So I don't know. I've got to learn not to do that.
I hear you.
I'm reminded of when we went to serve our very first church, and they did Vacation Bible School at the end of summer because the kids were ready to get back together, and I mean, there was good psychology in that. And they went to Bible school for 4 hours. No, that's not right. 2.5 hours. All 5 days of the week for 2 weeks. And they came to me and said, we want you to have a Bible study for the moms. And I'm going, what moms? When we went to serve this church, there was like 30 people in worship, and I thought, everybody's going to be in the kitchen, they're going to be baking cookies, they're going to be teaching, they're going to be aides. Who's going to come to this? And I started, my first reaction was, I can't do this. I cannot do this. And then I realized that God was really laying this on my heart. And I started praying, Lord, I don't know where all these people are going to come from, but if I'm going to prepare to teach for 2.5 hours for 10 days. Let there be enough people there just to make it meaningful, even if there's just 2 or 3. And what I didn't know was that this small community, all the Christians always worked together. So everybody sent their kids to everybody else's Sunday school, everybody else's vacation Bible school. And when I got to that first week, there were about 20 women from 11 different denominations. And that was, I talk about God answering the prayer and assuring me that I did have what it took. Awesome. He was faithful.
You've heard me talk a couple of times about her having some difficulties and having to be put into the hospital. And when we admitted her, they told me that I could not see her for a minimum of a week, if not more. And so, being the strong man that I was, I came home and went to bed for 3 days. I was a mess. This was the woman I loved. I didn't know what to do. We had started going to church a little bit. It wasn't until she got home that we really had sister-in-law come up and light a fire under everything. But her mom and dad came. You do not want to take on her dad. Education, what, about
8th grade.
8th grade? Yeah. But commitment to God, you weren't going to find anything more. And he told me to get out of bed and get moving. I couldn't argue with him. But you see, I think in that way that was my Jonah moment, because that's when I got thrown up out of the whale. I had a lot to learn, but it began there. I have found out over the years that, as you were saying, the fear of saying something needs to be overcome because it's in the saying of something. It doesn't have to be very profound. It doesn't have to be the end-all and be-all. But that our faith is a relational faith. And you establish a relation with somebody, and then it becomes easier to talk about a lot of other things. And somehow talking about the faith sneaks in there, whether you anticipated it or not. Actually, in our first church with her and the women and the study groups and everything, I think she had more influence than I had. Our first church was one in which, when we got there, we were lucky if there was, about
30.
And that was high. In an old building downtown.
100 years old.
Yeah. We left there. Probably to this day, I'm sorry that we did. But when we left there, we were in a new building and we were worshiping near 300. It's because we learned the lesson of not preaching, but of relating. And I think that's where the fear is. The fear is that I can't share with others around me because I haven't got the words. And it's not a matter of having the words. It's a matter of having the care and showing the care. And wherever the conversation goes, go with it. Because God will give you the words.
You talk about not having words. In my law enforcement days, was called to do a lot of notifications of death notifications, if you will.
Mhm.
And you all know I'm a pretty good talker at this point, but to go do that, you just never had the right, you never thought you could have the right words. And so a lot of times, I would sit in the car before if I was meeting somebody to go with me, and they weren't in the car with me, I'd sit and wait on them, and I usually was saying a prayer to help me out, Lord, help me say the right things. And a lot of times, if I was taking the pastor with me, Cindy,
Yeah.
took Cindy, I'd call her and she'd say, where are we going? And she and I would sit and talk before we went in and say a prayer before we ever started, because you don't know what you're going to encounter. You knock on the door and it's in the middle of the night, and they open the door and there's a preacher and a police officer standing there. They know that's not going to be good. So it's tough to come up with the words, but I found that little prayer that I said helped me put the words in my mouth that needed to be said.
Yeah.
And to this day, I don't know how I really did that. That was tough.
Yeah.
God used you.
Boy, that just triggered one inside me. This little town in Mokina, our first town, we had become really active in the community, and I was on a planning board. And one afternoon, the chief of police was out of town, and his lead deputy came and knocked on the door and said, I've got a guy over here, and I really don't know what to do. Now, today as a police, you'd really know what to do. It's probably he was not well trained. He says, but he's threatened to kill himself. And I don't want to do anything that would prompt him to do that. Would you come with me? And I felt like saying, you got to be kidding me. But I got in the car and we went over. And he was ranting and raving and saying that and all that. And for some reason, I didn't know, till this day I don't know why. I said, do you have any kind of a church that you go to? He said, I'm a Baptist. And I said, oh, well, I'm in a Baptist seminary. What do Baptists say about life? And we got to talk and talk. And probably talk for an exceptionally long period of time. And finally I just said, your God's looking at you right now. And he's not looking at you because he's ready for you to come home. He's looking at you because he wants you to stay and do his work. Give me the gun. And he did. It wasn't me. It was just the right things at the right point in time that God had orchestrated. I wouldn't do that again on a bet. Hey, you're trained to do things like that. I wasn't trained to do things like that.
Let me tell you about my first training in that. This was long before the state police. This is when I had gone to work for the sheriff's department. And they put me to ride with a deputy. He was old. He probably was 60.
Wait a minute, I'm 80.
Yeah, he probably was 60.
Oh, gracious.
So I'm riding with him, and he's supposed to be training me. And we get this call of an attempted suicide. And we arrive, and he gets out of the car, and there's a lady and a child in the yard. And he says to her, Martha, what's going on? said, Ralph's trying to commit suicide. Miller says to her, she says, where is Ralph? He's on top of the barn. So we walked out to the barn, and he was on top of the highest point of the barn.
Oh, my gosh.
And Miller says to Martha, he says, what's he done, or what's he said up to this point? He's threatening to jump. And so Miller looks up at him. Now, he's training me, okay? Miller looks up at the guy and says, Ralph, what are you doing up there? He says, well, I'm going to commit suicide. And he, something about money or whatever, blah, blah, blah. Miller looks right up at him and says, go ahead and jump. And he did, right in front of us. Landed on the ground, broke both his legs. Lived to tell about it.
Oh, my gosh.
That's all he did, was broke 2 legs in that fall. And after that, we never got a call back there. And so one day I asked Miller, I said, did you ever check on Ralph? He says, oh, Ralph's okay, he's back to work, no big deal. And I'm thinking, I'm not sure I understand this training. Go ahead and tell him to jump when he's going to commit suicide. But that's how I learned to deal with it initially.
Oh, mercy.
It's like the crowd below a building and they're all yelling, jump, jump.
Yeah, jump. He did, right in front of us.
Oh, my goodness.
That's unbelievable that he didn't die.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Go ahead and jump.
But isn't this story about Jonah at this point in time about second chances?
He sure got one.
He got one.
He got one.
Mm.
And isn't the story about how maybe instead of solving people's problems, we just ought to give them second chances? That's one of the things that I find difficult to understand in some churches, some pastors, some people. They don't want to give them second chances. They want to convert them on the spot and make them whole new and different. Conversion and becoming new is God's problem. I firmly believe in that. God has called me to help, not cause. Help somebody have a second chance. The woman at St. John's that walked in that was filthy dirty, second chance. The kid that had run away, hooked him up with the police department. He was cleaning houses. Second chance. So I look back over ministry. I can't point to a lot of salvation experiences that I've had with others. I can point to a lot of second chances. And I know for a fact that most of those second chances ultimately came to Christ. I even saw a conversion of a lesbian to a straight person and getting married. Second chance. It's just, I think that's my job. My job is to show to an individual what the world can be like and give them a second chance. It's not my God to save anybody. My job to save anybody. It's my God's job to save them. That realization has got me through a lot of things. And I think it is related to this story because those sailors didn't want to throw Jonah overboard. They really didn't want to. But he told them he'd have to. And they threw him overboard, much to their dismay. He got swallowed by a whale. But a second chance. So for me, at least, I know that God is a God of a second chance, oftentimes of a third, a fourth, and a fifth chance. And all I am asked to be is there to assist them in the midst of that chance. That's a lot easier, a lot more effective than having it hang on your shoulder that it's your job to go out and save people. Now, you may be in a situation where you can say something and you can bring salvation. But it's going to be a lot easier to say things and help facilitate a second, third, and fourth chance. And I believe that's buried in this story of Noah, of Jonah rather. Lamentation says, the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. And so realizing that, and realizing that that passage says, it is new every morning, I think I'm all part of the newness. And it's great, it's his faithfulness. But my faithfulness has to be faithfulness in him and to be used by him. Well, Jonah's gone to Nineveh. He's announced the message of Yahweh to his people. And what's going to happen next? We've got that coming up next week. We've got
It's our last week, right?
Huh?
Next week is our last.
No, we've got two. We've got 2 weeks.
Okay.
2 more.
2 more weeks. 7 and 8.
Okay.
So tell the people that haven't been here that they're missing something. I think they're missing something. I think this was the heart of Jonah, of this book, and they missed it.
Yeah.
Let's give them a second chance.
Good point.
Okay, let's give them a second chance. Anybody want to close this in prayer? I'll give you a second chance. Father, we've been small tonight, but it's been a good night. I thank you for this segment. I thank you for this series of lessons. But I thank you more for your love for us and your desire that we all have a second chance. You know better than I that if it wasn't for second chances, I wouldn't be sitting here tonight. God, show us the way that we might be your instrument, not to salvation, but to chances. And that helps remove the fear of being your instrument. In Jesus' name, Father. Amen.
You know, years ago, my church had a Stevens ministry. Did you
Oh,
know
yes.
that? Yeah,